welcome to the lecture series on Indian philosophy. Today I will talk about the Yoga school of Indian philosophy. Yoga, or should I say the practice of yoga, is something which we all are quite familiar with. It would be most appropriate to say that yoga is an intrinsic part of Indian culture. Its purpose is to bring about physical as well as spiritual well-being. If we go by tradition, then we attribute the system of yoga to the great sage Patanjali. But we do find references of yoga or even the practice of yoga in the earlier scriptures also. For example, the Vedas, the Upanishads, even the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. It is one of the oldest sciences of the world, having its origin in India. From the religious point of view, Lord Shiva is considered to be the first teacher of yoga. How and when yoga got recognized is not clear. But as a philosophical system with its own text called the Yoga Sutras, we know that it is Sage Patanjali who is the founder and composer of it. As it is Sage Patanjali who for the first time wrote a systematic work on yoga philosophy. Later, commentaries were also written on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. There is one commentary by Vyasa which is called Yoga Bhashya. Then there are two by Vijnana Bhikshu called Yoga Vartika and Yoga Sara Sangraha. Let us now understand the etymology of the term yoga. The term yoga is derived from the Sanskrit verbal root yuj, which means to join, to unite two things. So, yoga is a practical path or a method that joins. And Sage Patanjali is in fact presenting in these sutras a practical method to join the higher self with the lower self, an insight into the human nature. One gets to understand the relationship between self-knowledge, morality, and spiritual emancipation. Before I go into the details, a few important things that must be clarified at the outset. As I mentioned earlier, that there are references of the term yoga, even the practice of yoga, in the ancient texts. So, what I mean is that Sage Patanjali composed literature for the future generations to know about yoga. But he is not the originator of the yoga philosophy or practices as such. The Mahabharata says that the representative of the Sankhya philosophy is Sage Kapila, while that of yoga is Hiranyagarbha. The Mahabharata further clarifies that Hiranyagarbha is the same who is praised in the Vedas and is worshipped by the followers of yoga. He is the mighty, eternal and all-pervading Supreme Being. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, there are many verses on what yoga is, who is a yogi, how does he look like, how can one become a yogi. One very famous verse is Yogastha Kuru Karmani Sangam Tyaktva Dhananjay Siddhi Asiddhiyo Samo Bhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. Now, which means be steadfast in the performance of your duty, O Arjuna, abandoning attachment to success and failure, Such equanimity is called yoga. There is another very interesting mantra in the Bhagavad Gita, and that is Yada hi nendriyartheshu na karmasva anushajjate sarva sankalpa sannyasi yoga rudasta tado uchyate, which means when one does not get attached to the objects of sense or to works and has renounced all purposes, then he is said to have attained to yoga. I would like to mention one more. It is Jnana Vijnana Triptatma Kutastho Vijitendriyaha Yukta Ityuchyate Yogi Samaloštashma Kanchanaha, which means the yogi who is satisfied by knowledge and discrimination and has mastered his senses remains undisturbed in all circumstances. To him, everything, dirt, stone, and gold is the same. These are actually only a few verses from the Bhagavad Gita, but there are a plethora of verses explaining yoga and its various forms like Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. I wish to repeat myself again. The word yoga is mentioned in the Vedas and the Upanishads also. In ancient times, in the Gurukuls, the teachers instructed students about the practical as well as the spiritual value of yoga. I would say the teachers were keener on imparting the spiritual value attached to it. Yoga sadhana was very much part of the curriculum. Pranayama was a part of the daily ritual of performing sacrifices. And this is quite evident from the various verses in the Vedas and the Upanishads. The sages received Vedic wisdom from their teachers in the yogic state of samadhi. The scriptures tell us that the proper technique of attaining Vedic wisdom is while performing yoga sadhana or samadhi, because it is in this state that the yogi is disposed to grasp the intent of the Vedic wisdom completely, fully. There is one mantra in the Yajurveda where the word yoga appears. It is Yoge yoge tavastaram vaje vaje havamahe sakhaya indram utaye. On the face of it, one may say that it means that in every junction of life, in every battle or a booty winning contest, oh friends, we call the mightiest Indra for aid. But let us understand this a little more minutely. Now the word sakhaya means a friend who is equal in guna and karma svabhava. Yoge yoge means in one's respective yoga. Vaje vaje means in every stage or level of one's yoga marga. Utaye means to protect or to succeed. Tavastaram means mighty or extremely courageous. Indra, is God. Havamahe means we call or invoke. So, keeping these meanings in mind, the mantra may be translated as, "O friends, let us invoke the extremely courageous Indra for help in protecting us and achieving success at every stage in our yoga marga." Of course, this aid is required because our mind and sense organs are by nature outward looking. To train them to look inwards requires a strict discipline and successful completion of each and every stage that leads to it. I would also like to mention one mantra from the Rig Veda, which is "Yunjate mana uta yunjate dhiyo vipra viprasya brihato vipaschitah vihotra dadhe vayuna videka inmahi devasya savituh parishtuti." Now, if you do the anvay of this, then this mantra becomes "Vipraha manah yunjate dhiyah yunjate uta vayuna vid ikah ita hotraha vidhate vidadhe viprasya brihatah vipaschitah devasya savituh mahi parishtutihi," which may be translated as, "Great is the glory of the immanent soul, who is all-pervading, all-knowing, infinite and self-luminous. Only those rare few who know undergo the necessary discipline and spiritual practices. The wise do indeed control the activities of the intellect and practice meditation and concentration." Unfortunately, in today's times, yoga is mostly associated with either extreme asceticism or performance of various asanas. The reason why commentaries on the texts are written is to protect the text from getting misinterpreted or distorted. At least sage Vyasa had this purpose in mind. I can tell you that. His commentary is an authoritative source of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Anyway, coming back to the confusion regarding the term yoga. We all know yoga as a technique which enables us to have a healthy and active body rather. Through the practice of the yogasanas, one can achieve peace and calmness, which the passions, desires, appetites take away from the life of an individual. Apart from the physical practices, yoga prescribes mental practices also to purify the mind. Actually, the aim and purpose of yoga is self-realization, to overcome all kinds of sufferings leading to the state of liberation. So, you see, there is a period when yoga was popular, it was practiced, but was not systematized as a philosophical school. This is the time of the Vedas and the Upanishads. Then came the time of sage Patanjali, who composed the Yoga Sutras and developed the yoga system as an independent system of thought. Perhaps this is the time when the Mahabharata and of course Bhagavad Gita were being given a written form. But after sage Patanjali, in the later periods, a new cult emerged that popularized Hatha Yoga. Now, Hatha Yoga is a system that is totally about physical techniques. It is associated with the yogis of the Nath Sampradaya. Some of the popular Nath yogis of the Hatha Yoga tradition are Matsyendranath, Gorakshanath, Chauranginath, and Srinivas Bhatta. If you read the Dattatreya Yoga Shastra, which is the earliest text which gives a systematized form of Hatha Yoga, you will find that there are two forms of Hatha Yoga. The first is attributed to Yajnavalkya, which consists of the 8 limbs of yoga, and the second is attributed to Kapila, which consists of 10 mudras. In today's times, what has become so popular by the name of yoga and which the whole world recognizes is actually a development of Hatha Yoga, which is just about the asanas. Various traditions, lineages and Guru Shishya Paramparas of yoga have emerged over a period of time, each having its own principles and practices. But of course, I am not going into the details of Hatha Yoga, for that is not my purpose in today's lecture. Also, that is not what sage Patanjali talked about. In fact, sage Patanjali's Yoga Sutras depict a responsible engagement in various ways of spirit or Purusha, which is the same as self or pure consciousness, and matter, that is Prakriti, which is the same as mind, body, nature, resulting in a highly developed, transformed and participatory human nature and identity, an integrated and embodied state of liberated selfhood or Jivan Mukti. Now let us understand who was this sage Patanjali. As of now, we know him only as a compiler of the Yoga Sutras, but there are 2 other notable works that are attributed to an author named Patanjali. One is the Mahabhashya, which is a commentary on an authoritative Sanskrit grammar text written by Panini, the famous grammarian. The second is the Charaka Vartika, which is a commentary on the Charaka Samhita, a great treatise on Ayurveda. Now, a group of modern scholars believes that it cannot be the same Patanjali who compiled all these works, since the timeline of 3 works is very different. But there are many other scholars who hold that, they hold a more traditional view that a single Patanjali is indeed responsible for all these 3 works. In fact, many communities within the Hindu tradition consider Patanjali to be a divine figure. In many Puranas, the name Patanjali appears in the list of 26 mythical divine serpents. If you read the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, which is a supplement to the Vishnu Purana, you will notice that it says that the image of Patanjali's yoga teaching should have the same form of Ananta. And Ananta, if you know, is described in Hindu tradition as the divine lord of serpents, who holds all the planets of the universe on his 1000 cobra hoods. So you see, this Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, which was probably written in the 6th century, establishes a connection between the Yoga Patanjali and the Ananta Patanjali, as if they are not 2 but one and the same. Now King Bhoja, who had great interest in arts, literature and science, he wrote in the introduction of his commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and he writes, Yogen chittasya paden vacham malam sharirasya cha vedyaken yo pakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjali ranato asmi, which means, I bow with folded hands to Patanjali, the best of sages, who removed the impurities of the mind through yoga, the impurities of speech through grammar, and the impurities of body through medicine. To he whose upper body has a human form, who holds a conch and a wheel, who is white and has 1,000 heads, to that Patanjali I offer obeisance. Now you can see King Bhoja's salutations to Patanjali recognize the yoga, the ananta, the grammar and the Ayurveda Patanjali to be the same person. But we do not have to go into that, as we are only concerned with the Yoga Patanjali for our purposes. And there is no confusion about this, that Patanjali is the compiler of Yoga Sutras. The sage Patanjali is said to have attained samadhi through yogic meditation at a temple called Brahmapurishwarar, which is located at Tirupattur in Tamil Nadu. Now let us discuss the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. As you know, Yoga system is one of the 6 Astika darshan of ancient Indian philosophy, and Patanjali adopted the Sankhya metaphysics, and his epistemology is also the same as that of Samkhya. He developed a practical side of the Sankhya metaphysics, which gives a greater insight into the Sankhya theory of Purusha and Prakriti. It may be said that Patanjali's main contribution to spiritual thought lies in showing how and by what methods the spirit involved in the world of matter can withdraw from it and attain absolute freedom by first transforming matter into its original state of Prakriti and thereby realizing its own pure nature. See, the aim and purpose of sage Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras is to unravel the mystery of yoga, give insights into its practices, and lead the yogi or the aspirant from the realization of the individual self to that of the Supreme Self. In total, the Yoga Sutra contains 196 sutras, which are divided into 4 parts or padas. The first is called the Samadhi Pada. It is about spiritual absorption. It explains the grades and stages of actions that are necessary for restraining the exhibitive operations of the mind. The second is called the Sadhana Pada. It describes the means of practice. So it deals with the eradication of the impurities that have entered into our minds. Third is the Vibhuti Pada. It is about accomplishments. It pertains to the dissolutionary change of worldly life by taking recourse to Sanyam. Fourth or the last one is called the Kaivalya Pada. It is about the attainment of complete freedom. This last pada explains the working of the threefold action related to the present, past and future. It instructs how the individual self attains release from the bondage of actions and is merged into the Supreme Self. In the beginning of the Samadhi Pada, which is the first part of the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali gives the definition of yoga. He defines it as Yogascha Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is the second sutra, and which means yoga is the cessation of mental operations or modifications. Actually, the mind is full of impurities, which are a result of these mental operations. Now, liberation is possible only when, with the increasing light of knowledge, a progressive purification of mind takes place. The way Patanjali describes the whole thing is quite interesting. After stating that yoga is a cessation of mental operations, he lists the various kinds of mental operations or vrittis so that we can become aware of them and work in the direction of putting a restraint on them. So, the vrittis or mental operations are of 5 kinds, both painful and not painful. They are pramana, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra and smriti. Now, pramana is real cognition, which is of 3 kinds: perception, inference and verbal testimony. Viparyaya means false knowledge. Vikalpas are empty concepts. Nidra means sleep and smriti is memory. Now, all these are modifications of the mind. Notice, even sleep is a modification. It is an experience which is based on absence. Smriti is the retention of the experienced objects. Vikalpa is fiction. It is devoid of any substance. Viparyaya, as I just said, is false knowledge which is later destroyed by real cognition. For example, seeing of double moon is destroyed by the sight of one moon. Since these 5 vrittis or mental operations are the causes of pleasure, pain and ignorance, they need to be restrained as they give rise to afflictions and attachments. Anyway, we will go into the details of this, but in the next lecture. Thank you for now. Thank you.